Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate that. Well, I am very, very excited today. I'm just jumping out of my skin. I have my daughter Mandy, our oldest daughter,
Hello.
and Aaron
Hello.
with us. And in fact, you two are married, so I've been told.
We
Yep.
are.
We are?
Yes.
Yes, that is
So
true.
I'm really, really excited because we're going to have a conversation together. I just want you to join us as if this is our little lounge room here. And I'm hoping this conversation will be inspiring, it'll encourage, and it's also going to be some fun for us, right?
Yep.
You're with that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. So when I think of your lives, I think of basically constant change. There's just been change upon change in your lives. And today I want to focus a little bit on the concept that we live in a world that keeps changing. It's constant change. And how do we deal with that? And that's like a theme that's been part of your lives. So I'm thinking back to the fact that you two come from very different backgrounds. You're a country girl,
Yep.
Bairnsdale, born and bred and raised in
That's
Bairnsdale.
right.
And you're I'm sorry, but you're a city raised Sydney person, right?
Handsome jockstrap. That's what you
Well,
meant
that's
to say.
true. In fact, genetically, I think you're a
definition.
good match. You know, you help to build upon the athleticism that I've imparted into Mandy, and you are helping in the next generation. So, I think that's pretty good too.
Trying to do our part.
You are. So, Aaron, you both come from different backgrounds. Your first big change in life really happened when your mum and dad divorced when you're 10, 11 years of age. How did you actually survive through those teenage years with that trauma of that breakdown relationship? Was there anything that helped you be stable through those years?
Yeah, absolutely. They were absolutely tough years. I think it was about 10 or 11 years old when my mum and dad got divorced. And yeah, it left a lot of brokenness in me, a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, a lot of disappointment. It was the last thing that I was wanting for my life,
Yes.
for mum and dad to split and to grow up in a dysfunctional house. I love both of my parents. And so, yeah, it was a tough time. Obviously, I think it was at the age of about 14, 15 that I ended up giving my life to Christ. And there's obviously a whole backstory to that. But I'd say, obviously, that's probably the biggest factor in my life that's made the biggest difference in my life in terms of helping me navigate my journey
From there
of
through.
overcoming
Yes.
pain, the hurt, the brokenness. Obviously, it's what Christ has done in me as I've drawn closer to Him. But I think also outside of that, it's the people that He's put around me as well. He plucked me out of one family, so to speak. There was a peer group that I was hanging around at school, and that wasn't a great group of people to be hanging around. They had a very
Yes.
bad influence on me. As a matter of fact, one of them's actually in jail now. The other one's no longer with us. That's the type of people that I was around.
Yes.
So I wasn't heading down a great path, and God plucked me out of that family, so to speak, and put me in another family, Christian family, and surrounded me with some great people. Like the Canones, who are pastors up in the Hawkesbury area, which is the church that I sort of grew up in.
Yes.
And yeah, just I think the pastor's son, he ended up becoming my best mate, and so doing the journey with people that are like iron sharpens iron in my world, that helped me understand the Father's love for me, who I was in Christ, just help establish that sense of value and worth and significance that I didn't have growing up for many
in
of
your
those
family
formative
background.
years.
Yes. Yep. Sure.
Leading up to that point. So, yeah, I
That's
think
good.
the people around me, I think that God put around me, are pivotal to who I am today,
Yes.
and what I'm doing today.
As you're watching today, you'll find that Aaron likes to talk. I like to talk. Mandy likes to talk.
This could go for a
so
while.
we're gonna try to keep it moving, but it's going to be a challenge. So, what I actually love about today, growing up, I would always say to Mandy, anyone under 30 has nothing to say. And it's because she was so opinionated, and so you're 36 now,
Yep.
and now we're actually inviting you to say something.
Thank you. Finally.
Yes, and in
Appreciate
fact, I value what you say. I value what you say, and we're going to see that come out today. Now, growing up, I know both of you, there was a moment in your life where you made a decision that actually changed the whole direction of your life. So, Aaron, do you want to just share us a little bit about that for you, that time, that move when you were really focused on golf at that time in your life?
Yep. So growing up, obviously, I grew up in a very sporty family. I love my sports, and always had in my heart to try and make a career out of playing sport, either golf or soccer, were the two sports that I sort of excelled at and sort of wanted to pursue, and end up being golf as the main one that I sort of focused on, channeled all my energy and focus into. And there was a time at about 17, 18 where I was off a fairly low handicap, and at the stage where I felt that I could start to be fairly competitive in the sport and potentially maybe make a career of it. But at that same time, I was also wrestling with the call of God on my life, which was to go into ministry. So there was this passion, desire to want to play sport, in particular play golf, and try and make a career of that. At the same time, there was this sense of calling of being a pastor on my life, and there's this tension going back and forth for a number of different years. And I just knew, after talking to a bunch of incredibly wise people in my life and getting counsel and just praying about which direction to take, I just felt that going obviously into ministry and pursuing that call was the right move for me.
Which was
wasn't
actually
an easy move, that's for sure.
But that was actually a choice you made, and you chose to go into working with young people, with youth.
Yep.
In fact, amazingly, you still are. 20
many
years
years
later,
later,
nearly,
absolutely.
which is incredible, and carrying a big role in youth, and especially some of the responsibilities you have in the Sydney area with Youth Alive and all that sort of
Absolutely.
stuff. Mandy, a little moment in your life where you made a decision that changed everything.
For me, it was halfway through year 12. I know you and Mum had been praying a lot.
Well,
for
you
me
put us
through
through
my
a lot. You put us through a
teenage
lot. You did.
And I think, because you guys didn't give up praying for me, and because you helped me stay planted in church, whether I liked it or not. I was at Hillsong Conference halfway through year 12, and I was there against my will, and I was there with the worst attitude. But in the midst of worship in one of the meetings, God clearly spoke to me, and he just gave me this sentence: for the generations to come, for the sake of the generations to come. And I knew God was wanting me to say yes to the call of God on my life. And so that's when I chose halfway through year 12 that I was going to shift to Sydney as soon as I finished school and go to Hillsong Bible College. And I think for me, like for people that are listening today, it's not about whether you're called to full-time ministry or not. For me, it was whether I trusted God or not, whether I believed that there was a bigger purpose for my life, and whether I genuinely believed that God's way was going to be the best way. So that's what enabled me to make that decision, and best decision I ever made, because I would have met Aaron or have our two beautiful boys otherwise.
Yeah, well, actually, talking of meeting Aaron, growing up, we had a sort of a rule in our family, was that until you're 18, you couldn't date anyone, and then it had to be someone that we approved. Now,
How'd that go?
well, it didn't go well. It was a good rule in principle, but you violated it, and you were so secretive and such a great liar to our face, and told us things that we actually believed that weren't true. But then when you did go to Sydney and live with the Canones, I got a phone call one day, and what was that?
That was me.
Yeah, I know that, but I recognise your voice when you ring, right?
Well, I think I decided that I was head over heels in love with Aaron and pretty much wanted to marry him, which meant we were ready to start dating.
No.
And I wanted permission, so I think I gave you guys a couple of hours to have a think and a pray about it and get back to me.
You rang me and you said, I've met this amazing creature called Aaron. What do you think? And I jumped in the car, didn't I? And drove to Sydney.
Yep.
Do you remember that first meeting, Aaron? Like officially, you and Mandy are on one side of the table and I'm on the other. Do you remember that conversation?
Absolutely.
First? You do.
I remember totally being scared out of my wits because I'd heard a bit about you. I hadn't met you up to that stage, but I'd heard all about you. There was this short, sort of burly, stocky, barrel-chested guy who apparently had an anger problem when he was younger, who also owned 3 guns and nuded things. And he was coming up to see if I was a perfect match for his daughters. So it was a bit of an understatement to say that I was a little bit nervous. But I think everything worked out all right because I'm still here. So
in fact, I can remember that day actually giving you guys our blessing as on behalf of Coral and myself to begin this little journey together. And then you two get married. Now, very different backgrounds, very different people. How have you navigated sticking this thing called a marriage together in the years that have followed? What challenges? What lessons? What have you learnt, Mandy? What have you thought?
Wow. Well,
Question.
I've
Well, I
learned
started with hurt.
I've learned that marriage is the best thing and the toughest thing in the world. We're definitely very, very different. I think we learned early on. I think our first fight was on our honeymoon because we had a 3-week honeymoon. So I think that's long enough to start to fight. But anyway, when we got home, we quickly realized that the way we process things is completely opposite. So I want to, talk about things and deal with things, and Aaron would want to ignore things and bottle things up. And so definitely we found ourselves in those crazy cycles of very opposite ways of dealing with things that kind of made each other's ways of dealing with things worse. So I think marriage for us has been a massive journey of understanding ourselves and then understanding each other and learning to accept the other person even if they're completely opposite to you.
Because you have this capacity in life, Mandy, to want to change everyone
Yes.
to be like you.
Yes.
Because that's the measuring stick, isn't it?
It would be great.
And especially when you're working on Aaron to change him. Have you ever felt that pressure, Aaron?
No, not whatsoever. I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think a commitment, very early on, I learnt that making a commitment to, I suppose, dealing with the muck and the junk that we all carry in life and making sure that we're swift to do that. I mean, coming from a broken home, I knew there was a lot of junk and muck in me that I brought into that marriage that was going to cause a lot of pain, a lot of hurt if I, wasn't, willing to deal with that stuff and process that and work that through. And, stuff pops up in and throughout every season of life. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned is not to carry a wounded spirit and make sure that, when the other person offends you or hurts you, and that's going to happen multiple times, that we're quick to process that, quick to deal with that pain, that hurt, quick to forgive. Otherwise, it can cause a lot of pain internally for you, but then that ends up being, sprayed on those that are around you that you love the most. And so, I think that's probably one of the biggest life lessons that I've learned, to have a healthy marriage, healthy family.
Yep.
And I think you do have to go back to the promises of God when you go through the tough times, when things feel like all hope is lost, or when it feels like there's no way forward or we can't make this work. There have been times where it's crying to God in the middle of the night. It's going to that Bible verse and saying,
Yes.
well, yeah, and
Yes.
ringing you guys, but trying to go to God first. But I think it's in the times where nothing looks like it makes sense in the natural that you have to go to your foundation, your rock bottom in God, and cling to Him and believe that in the fullness of time, you're going to see the hand of God at work in your marriage and your family. And we've definitely had to do that at times.
And like for you, Aaron, I know growing up that, like, coming from a family where your dad wasn't part of your everyday life, and then you become a Christian and people tell you, well, God's a God of love. He's like a father to you. And I know that for you personally, you knew that God loved you, but feeling Him, experiencing Him, that was very hard for you, wasn't it? What changed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Growing up in a dysfunctional household and not having a father around meant that I lacked the affirmation that comes from an earthly father, and so there was definitely a hole and a void in me. And I think a lot of the time, those that have had a bad experience with their earthly dad, that brokenness can become the lens through which you then view God and how you see God, and that was very much the case for me, which for a lot of my Christian journey, especially early on, caused me to struggle with my relationship with God. I knew theologically up here that He loved me. That's what I'd read in the Word. That's what I'd been told by listening to preachers and pastors, podcasts. But, experiencing that on a heart level, that was really challenging for me. And so it did become a wedge for a very long time between me being able to intimately connect with God. And it wasn't until I actually had an encounter, a personal, probably the first genuine encounter with God's presence in an intimate way that I can remember, which was back this is probably going back 12, 13 years ago. And I was just crying out to God. I went up to Razorback Ridge, which was an area back up in the Hawkesbury where I grew up, and just parked my car and I just sat there for hours. And I just remember bawling my eyes and just crying out to God and just saying there has to be more than this, than just a theological understanding of who you are. I need to experience you. And I knew that somehow that the brokenness that I felt and the wholeness that I wanted was only going to come through encountering God intimately. And so I just remember crying out in that moment. And there was a specific passage in Matthew 22 that God gave me in that moment that really just spoke to my heart. And I just remember so clearly that being the first time that I encountered the tangible love and presence of God, and it just almost like flicked a switch in me in that moment. And from then on, it's still been a challenge at times, but I now am in a place in my life where I can say that I regularly encounter the presence of God in a tangible way. And so it hasn't been an easy journey to get to that point, but it's just been sticking it out and making sure that I have that daily quiet time where I'm connecting with God in His presence, pursuing Him. And the Bible says, if you seek me, you will find me. Absolutely.
Yes.
If you seek me, you will find me. But it comes in that persistence of seeking Him and pushing into Him.
So God's really become a true father to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And now you've become a father yourself. And Mandy, you're even a mother. In fact, both of you have created these two little precious gems called Jesse and Zeke, 10 and 7. And they're a challenge. Like, some kids are really easy to raise like me. Like you. Actually, no, you were a pain. You were seriously hard work,
We
Mandy.
all blame you.
But,
The whole
we're all products
family
of our
line.
parenting at the end of the day.
In fact, my parents, I put them through a lot, as you did us. And you have two boys that are very task-focused. They're very emotional. They're very strong, opinionated. They think they're right and you're wrong. And everything should go according to how they see things. And so tell me how the challenges of parenting two very boisterous, driven kids has been for you both.
Well, it's been amazing and definitely challenging all at the same time. I think you grow so much when you have your own kids. It causes you to look at things within yourself when they press your buttons, when you find yourself reacting, and it causes you to take responsibility when you see behaviours in them and you realise, oh, I think we've modelled that, or I think they might have inherited that from us.
Yes.
So we've had to go on a big journey of, again, learning more about ourselves so that we can help our kids, because the more whole we become as parents, the more wholeness we can model to them, and we can only help them navigate what we've navigated ourselves.
Well, that's a really powerful truth, what you just said. And I think there's some emotional stuff that you've been looking at that was helpful for you guys as parents, true?
Yeah, probably about 2 years ago. I mean, there's been different steps of the way in parenting our kids where we've realised we're out of our depth. We need to educate ourselves. We need to grow more in order to be able to help them. And so about 2 years ago, we did an amazing online parenting course, Emotion Coaching, The Heart of Parenting by John Gottman. And we'd recommend any of his books and any of his things. And it really helped us to understand the families we grew up in. And depending on what environment you grew up in, there are certain attitudes towards certain emotions, whether it's happiness or anger or sadness or fear and worry, and how you were raised and the responses that were modeled to you and how to deal with these emotions really affects how we parent our kids. And so we did that course, and I think that showed us that there were some unhealthy attitudes towards certain emotions that was actually causing a fear response from us or a control response in us.
So do you mean like, say, for anger?
Yeah.
Because Jesse can explode very quickly, can't he?
Yes, and I kind of when we did this course, I realized that I was scared of my anger. And that had been an emotion that I never knew what to do with. I knew that I had anger. I knew that I had a very intense personality. I knew that I wasn't meant to be led by my anger, but then didn't know what to do with it. And so we found this course helped us go on a journey of understanding our own emotions, that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. There's only bad responses and bad choices to our emotions. And I feel like that was a light bulb moment that set us free. And then when we aren't bound by fear, we're able to help our kids navigate their emotions, and we can come from a place of faith and peace in helping them navigate some pretty intense stuff. So that was really, really helpful for us.
Yep, fantastic. And then, like, when I think of your lives and the changes that just keep coming, you guys been involved in youth programs you've run, you've seen great successes in those. and you were living in Newcastle, and we invited you to come and be part of our church, our young church called Open House Church in Sydney. And wherever you'd been, everything you'd done had worked. You were loved wherever you were, right? Who wouldn't love you guys, right? And then you arrive at Open House Church. And tell me, Mandy, I think maybe in the first week, you got an email. Tell me about the email.
Well, yeah, I think we'd been there for 1 week and had one Sunday, and I think you got Aaron to
He
MC a game or do
Yeah.
something youthy. And, you know, we just thought we were so excited to be here and to plant this church with you guys. And then I got this email from a lady in the church. And as I started reading the email, I quickly realized that she hadn't intended to send it to me
No.
because it was about us, wasn't it? And it was basically...
So she sent this email, she thought she was sending it to someone else.
She thought she was sending it to other people in the church, basically saying, who are these people and why, you know, who do they think they are and why have they come here? And does Aaron think he's an American game show host? And a few other words. And so I quickly realized that she hadn't meant to send it to me.
No.
Because it was about me.
Yes.
So that was a nice warm welcome.
And you did reply to her too, didn't you?
I think I did. I can't remember what I said. I think I thanked her for her feedback and her comments.
I think you actually said, oops, I think you sent this to the wrong person.
I was quite happy that she accidentally sent it to me. I thought that was good.
So the youth program that you're part of really flourished, and then for different reasons, some of the team left, and the youth ministry sort of melted down. And whenever all you know is success, and then things change, and you don't initiate that change, it just hurts, and you feel abandoned by people, disappointed with people. How do you process that? How do you process even your own identity in what you had that flourished and it's now gone?
I think the season at Open House Church for us was our wheels falling off the cart time. That's how we fondly like to talk about it. And I think at the time it felt like, you know, everything was crumbling and everything was falling down. I think halfway through I started to realize that it was actually the kindness of God and the mercy of God that he had called us to partner with you guys with a church plant, knowing that it wouldn't go according to plan, knowing that it would be our first time of really wrestling with significant failure and heartache in ministry. And it was like God needed us to go through that season in order to show us what some of our identity and worth was built upon. And so I think for me, that was the first time in my life that I realized that a lot of my value and worth was coming from what I did and the results I got back from what I did, an ability to do good things, get good results, and have people think that I'm good and doing good. And so it was like, you know, that supply was cut off, and that was no longer feeding my needs of value and worth. And the fallout was pretty big in me. Basically had a pretty big emotional breakdown because that went on for a number of years. And so then had to rebuild, well, where do I get my value and worth from? Who am I if I'm not able to succeed in these areas of my life? And where does my significance come from? So that was kind of the journey at Open House. And in that, we did Dr. Carolyn Leaf's 21-day brain detox for about 18 months. We did a lot of them. And then we ended up going to an amazing Christian psychologist up in Sydney who hugely helped us. Yes. I started going and then encouraged Aaron to go. I think I booked you in without your knowledge and then told you had an appointment. And if you cancel, we lose the money. Yes. So you better go.
And I guess the thing is that, well, when you're in an organisation, if you're working for a boss, right, and you're not the person that makes all the final decisions, you want to please that person. You got people that you're responsible for. That people pleasing thing was a challenge for you too, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, this is turning into like all my issues for the whole interview.
Okay.
This is great.
Takes the heat off you, Aaron.
Therapy session, isn't it?
No, basically from the work I did with our Christian psychologist, it kind of came to the forefront that my two biggest, struggles in life was definitely fear of failure and approval addiction, wanting people's approval,
Yes.
needing people's approval. And basically, I worked out that from a young age, even as young as I can remember to the age of 4, I just worked out it was a system that seemed to work great. And so I didn't realize that I'd been performing for this system my whole life of getting approval from people by what I did until I could no longer get approval. And I think God, in his mercy, put us in a season where it was like all the supplies were getting cut
Yes,
off.
they did.
And it was the toughest thing that I think I have ever had to go through, but the best thing. And the freedom that comes on the other side of all the wheels falling off your cart and then God rebuilding you and rebuilding your foundations and where you get all this from, life is so much more fun when you're free.
Yes.
And, that's when you experience the fact that God's load is light and easy, when you actually get free internally to experience walking in his rhythms of grace. And that's been our journey through that season.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, because Aaron, you have had great success in youth ministry, and you've had struggles when, and it's beyond your control. So it really just challenges you, doesn't it, in how you respond in those moments, that your identity isn't in the success.
Absolutely, yep. I've got a very similar story to Mandy. Growing up again in a broken, dysfunctional family, I was a very needy person. So I was very much, I suppose, consumed by approval addiction, trying to get my validation and love from other people. That was something that, our parents are supposed to give their kids through the affirmation that they give them. I obviously didn't receive that at times, and so I sought that because it's an innate need in, our humanity, that we need to be, loved, and we need to be, to belong, to know that we have value, significance, and so if I wasn't to get that from my parents, then I was going to look for it in other people. And so going through this journey, I sought it through our successes and through having a great ministry and flourish. And I thought, well, as long as everything around me circumstantially is going well, then people are going to love me, people are going to like me. And it wasn't until we went through this season where it seemed like everything that could possibly succeed was stripped away from us. And it was like everything we touched turned to gold, and it was like God's hand of grace was upon us up until this point. It was like it almost, he took it off for a season, and it hurt and it was hard. And it was it was the breaking of us, but also the making of us as well. But that journey wasn't an overnight journey. It was month after month, year after year. And it was a deconstructing of ourselves, pulling us, dismantling us completely as a person, and then rebuilding us on the right foundation, which I know for me was God's love and getting my affirmation, my significance, my value, my worth, not from what I do or the success that I had, but rather from who I am in Christ and who He is as my Father.
In these constant changes, because that's
absolutely.
It's just been your whole life has been constant changes and dealing with that constant change, And so even like with the coronavirus right now, how that's affected what you're doing to help people, how it's affecting you with homeschooling 2 kids. Tell us a little bit about that. In fact, tell me, I've got 2 last questions for you. What is one thing that this coronavirus or the homeschooling has brought into you that you weren't expecting that's been really harder than you thought? Just so, Aaron, one thing that you felt it's really been hard in this little season that you weren't expecting?
You've got simply the logistics of having to balance 2 full-time jobs, homeschooling 2 kids, obviously the pastoral care of a church of 1,1400 as pastors. We were just given, I think, just 2 weeks ago, 250 to 300 people each to ring in the church personally, phone call.
Yes.
Just as part
and that takes a lot of energy.
Absolutely, it does. Emotional, mental, just a time factor. It's a huge responsibility, privilege at the same point, but that's incredibly draining as well. On top of running kids ministry, youth ministry, young adults, shifting and transferring everything from doing it face to face, running programs at the church, to moving and shifting everything online. So you've got the whole logistics of all of that that you're trying to balance, and the tension of meeting all those demands. But for me, I think it's being in the like a pressure cooker situation, which is what the COVID virus has done for us. And like anything in life, when the pressure's applied, what's inside is going to come out when the squeeze is on in life. And I feel that that's what it's done for us. And it's probably what it's doing for many people. And it's not just dealing with everything I just said then. It's then dealing with all the muck that comes to the surface when the squeeze of life is on. So if there's relational issues, there's cracks there's junk, there's muck. If there's relational issues with your kids, that's all going to come to the surface. So then it's navigating and processing and dealing with all of that on top of just the everyday challenges that you're facing that COVID brings. So, yeah.
Mandy, same question. One thing that you were not expecting that this coronavirus would bring into your world that's been hard?
I think like everything that you said, and I think the good that's come out of it, out of the hard things, is just the squeeze and everything coming to the surface. I think something I've learned more than ever before in my life is that God is in our home. God is in our home on our best day or our worst day.
Yes.
And God is in the mess. God is found in the limitations of life. God is found in the hardships of life. And God is found when you don't have control.
Yes.
And I think it's been finding God in those moments and knowing that God's presence is there even when things aren't going well at home, and not letting shame and condemnation and guilt trick you into thinking that God is not here when God is here. And so I think that's been a journey for us. And for me, being a control freak and wanting to succeed in every area of my life, it's been quite hilarious seeing every area of my life chucked into a melting pot in the house, stirred, and then it's like you can't succeed in every area at once. You cannot do the full-time job, the full-time schooling, the full-time parenting all at once and do it all well.
Yes.
And so learning to trust God in that and be present at one thing at a time and let go of what I can't do and trust God with the rest. And
yes,
it's been fun.
It is. So one thing, just to finish, one thing that has been a benefit. Can you just, like one thing, Aaron, can you think of one thing that caught you by surprise that actually has been a good thing that's come out of this season?
I think the fact that we're forced to spend more time together, especially with the kids. I know that, we've loved every moment that we've got with our kids that we wouldn't have normally got had they been at school. And although there's been definitely some challenging times with our kids in those moments as well, where I've literally wanted to lay hands on my kids, and not in a spiritual sense, if you know what I mean. But, overall, these are such formative years in our kids. Our kids are what 7 and 10, I think.
Know.
Hopefully I should know that.
I can tell you the numbers.
Bad parenting moment right then. It's caught on
Only
camera
have
as
2.
well. Dang it.
You can remember their name.
But, they're still young. And
so that time with them has been precious.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. In very formative years. And we've got, extra time to be able to sow into, just laying a great foundation for our kids and sowing into those relationships, which is so special. You only get this time once. So by default, we've been given all this extra time, which I've been absolutely loving.
Terrific.
Spending time with my
Mandy,
kids.
one thing to finish.
I think coming together more around God and His Word. We've been praying in the mornings together, praying at night, getting more time to have family devotions together because we're not all rushing off to school and work. And actually that time in the mornings has been really beautiful. And I think I believe God's using this whole season to bring God back into our homes like never before and back into our families like never before. And for us as parents to see ourselves as our kids' pastors and our kids' disciplers first and foremost. And so I think that's been really precious and really beautiful to come out of this.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate you being here today. And I just hope that today has been helpful in some way, fruitful for you. And we're just, as Redgum Church, we want to be real. We want to put God in the middle of all our struggles and challenges and see what He can do. And that's been the story of so many of us. So over to you, Steve, and we'll finish with one song.